Imagine a shadowy figure emerging from the ruins of defeat, a man whose voice thundered like a storm across a shattered nation, promising eternal glory while weaving a web of hatred and domination that would engulf the world in flames. This is the story of Adolf Hitler, the architect of the 20th century's greatest horror, whose biography is not merely a chronicle of facts but an epic of boundless ambition, cunning manipulation, and a meteoric rise that transformed Germany from a fragile republic into an empire of terror. Born on April 20, 1889, in the small Austrian town of Braunau am Inn near the German border, Hitler entered the world as the fourth child of Alois Hitler, an authoritarian and temperamental customs official, and Clara Polzel, a devoted and submissive mother. His childhood was marked by deep family turmoil. Alois, a man of humble origins who had changed his surname from Schicklgruber to Hitler in 1877, enforced strict discipline, often with brutal physical punishments. While Clara tried to shield young Adolf, fostering in him an emotional dependence that would shape his narcissistic and unstable personality. At 6 years old, the family moved to Leonding, where Hitler attended primary school, showing early talent for drawing and public speaking, but also a rebellious streak against authority that led to constant conflicts with teachers and father figures. The premature death of his father in 1903, when Adolf was only 13, freed him from domestic tyranny but plunged the family into financial hardship, forcing him to abandon formal studies and dream of an artistic career that would, ironically, become the first step on his ladder into the abyss of absolute power. While the world around him simmered with the tensions of the multi-ethnic Austro-Hungarian Empire, an entity Hitler would come to despise, the young Adolf nurtured fantasies of grandeur inspired by Germanic myths and Wagnerian opera. Devouring books on German history and developing a virulent anti-Semitism that he would later attribute, in his own telling, to Viennese influences. In 1907, at age 18, he moved to Vienna, the cosmopolitan capital of the empire, hoping to enter the Academy of Fine Arts, but he was rejected twice, in 1907 and 1908, for lack of academic talent. A blow that left him bitter and wandering the streets as a failed artist, living off an orphan's pension and selling mediocre postcard paintings. Vienna, with its mix of Jews, Slavs, and other foreigners, fueled his racial hatred. He absorbed pan-German ideas from figures like George von Schauner and Karl Lueger, the anti-Semitic mayor of the city, blending them with pseudoscientific notions of Aryan superiority drawn from obscure pamphlets and conversations in homeless shelters. These years of poverty and isolation, from 1908 to 1913, forged the Hitler the world would come to know, a man obsessed with Jewish conspiracies, convinced that his mission was to unite Germanic peoples against internal and external enemies. In 1913, evading Austrian military service, he moved to Munich in Bavaria, where he finally felt at home among pure Germans, and it was there that the outbreak of World War I in 1914 catapulted him onto the stage of history. Volunteering for the Bavarian army, Hitler served as a dispatch runner on the Western Front, enduring the horrors of trench warfare in battles such as Ypres and the Somme, where he was wounded twice, once by shrapnel in 1916 and again by mustard gas in 1918, which temporarily blinded him. This war experience, which he would later romanticize in Mein Kampf as a baptism by fire, instilled in him fanatical nationalism and contempt for the betrayal of civilian leaders who, in his distorted view, had stabbed the army in the back with the November 1918 surrender. Germany's defeat in the Great War, followed by the Treaty of Versailles in 1919, which imposed territorial humiliations, demilitarization, and crushing reparations, created the fertile ground for the extremism that Hitler would exploit with mastery. Returning to Munich as a disillusioned veteran, he remained in the army as an intelligence agent, infiltrating radical political groups to monitor subversive activities. It was in this capacity that, in September 1919, Hitler attended a meeting of the German Workers' Party, DAP, a tiny nationalist group founded by Karl Harrer and Anton Drexler, consisting of about 50 members obsessed with anti-Semitism and anti-communism. What began as a surveillance assignment became the decisive first step toward the Nazi movement. Hitler, impressed by the group's ideas but critical of its lack of organization, joined as member number 555, though he later falsified it to number 7 to appear as a founder, and quickly rose thanks to his fiery oratory and magnetic charisma. In February 1920, under his influence, the DAP was renamed the National Socialist German Workers' Party, NSDAP, or Nazi Party, adopting a 25-point program that blended nationalist socialism, revocation of Versailles, exclusion of Jews from citizenship, and territorial expansion, ideas Hitler helped draft, infusing them with his vision of a racially pure Reich. This was the official birth of Nazism as an organized movement. The first step was not an armed revolution but a subtle infiltration and ideological rebranding, where Hitler transformed an obscure club into a propaganda machine. Adopting the swastika as its symbol, inspired by ancient Aryan emblems, and creating the S.A. Sturmabteilung, the paramilitary stormtroopers led by Ernst Röhm, to intimidate opponents and protect meetings. With hypnotic speeches in crowded Munich beer halls, Hitler captivated unemployed veterans, bourgeois ruined by the 1923 hyperinflation, and idealistic youth, promising to restore German greatness by eliminating traitors, Jews, communists, and Weimar Democrats. Hitler's rise to absolute power in Germany was a calculated process of manipulation, violence, and opportunism, culminating in the consolidation of a totalitarian regime that conquered the country not through foreign military invasion but through the internal erosion of democratic institutions. In the early years of the NSDAP, from 1920 to 1923, Hitler expanded the party from hundreds to thousands of members, funded by donations from anti-communist industrialists like Fritz Thyssen and using the Nazi press, such as the Völkischer Beobachter, to spread anti-Semitic propaganda. The turning point came with the 1923 crisis. France's occupation of the Ruhr over reparations defaults triggered catastrophic hyperinflation, where a loaf of bread cost billions of marks, and Hitler saw an opportunity for a coup inspired by Mussolini's March on Rome. On November 8, 1923, in the beer hall Putsch in Munich, Hitler and his allies, including Hermann Göring and Rudolf Hess, stormed a political meeting, declared a national government, and marched toward the city center with 2,000 armed Nazis. The clash with police left 16 Nazis dead and Hitler arrested, but he turned the trial into a national propaganda platform, gaining widespread sympathy by denouncing the November betrayal. Sentenced to 5 years in Landsberg prison, he served only 9 months, during which he dictated Mein Kampf to Hess, a manifesto of racial hatred and expansionism that sold millions and outlined his Weltanschauung, including the theory of Lebensraum, living space, for Aryans in Eastern Europe and the demonization of Jews as parasites. Released in December 1924, Hitler rebuilt the banned NSDAP, shifting to a legalistic strategy. Instead of putschs, he would pursue elections while strengthening the SS, Schutzstaffel, a personal elite guard loyal only to him, under Heinrich Himmler, to counterbalance the SA. The Great Depression of 1929, triggered by the Wall Street crash, was the catalyst that propelled the Nazis from the margins to the mainstream. German unemployment soared to 6 million, banks collapsed, and the already unstable Weimar Republic, with 14 governments in 14 years, appeared on the verge of total collapse. Hitler, now the undisputed Führer of the party after purging internal rivals, exploited the chaos with innovative election campaigns, airplanes for nationwide speeches, omnipresent posters, slogans like "Germany Awake," appealing to every class, workers with anti-capitalist promises, farmers with protectionism, industrialists with anti-communism, and nationalists with revanchism. In the 1930 elections, the NSDAP jumped from 12 to 107 seats in the Reichstag, becoming the second largest party. By 1932, with 37% of the vote, 230 seats, it was the largest, though still short of an absolute majority. Backroom intrigues followed. President Paul von Hindenburg, an elderly general who despised Hitler as a Bohemian corporal, appointed him chancellor on January 30, 1933, in a conservative coalition, believing he could control him. That was the fatal mistake. Hitler, with Göring as Prussian Minister of the Interior controlling the police, orchestrated the Reichstag fire on February 27, 1933, blaming communists, likely a Nazi false flag, which justified the Reichstag fire decree. suspending civil liberties and enabling mass arrests of opponents. In March 1933, manipulated elections gave the Nazis and Allies 52% of the vote, paving the way for the Enabling Act on March 23, which granted Hitler dictatorial powers to legislate without parliament for 4 years, the legal birth of the Third Reich. The consolidation of power was ruthless and multifaceted, an internal conquest that eradicated all opposition and Nazified German society at a dizzying pace. In June 1934, during the Night of the Long Knives, Hitler ordered the murder of roughly 150 rivals, including Rome and SA leaders who threatened his authority with radical socialist demands. The SS emerged as the dominant force, carrying out the purge with surgical coldness, while Joseph Goebbels' propaganda portrayed it as defense against a putsch. With Hindenburg's death in August 1934, Hitler merged the offices of Chancellor and President, becoming Führer und Reichskanzler, and demanded a personal loyalty oath from the army, neutralizing the last independent institution. The Gleichschaltung, coordination, followed, trade unions were dissolved and replaced by the German Labor Front, political parties banned, the press censored. Education Nazified with racist textbooks and compulsory Hitler Youth indoctrinating millions of young people with ideals of obedience and racial superiority. Economically, Hitler launched massive rearmament, violating Versailles, creating jobs through public works like the Autobahns and self-financing via Mefo-bills, fictitious bonds. Reducing unemployment to near zero by 1938 and winning broad popular support. Culturally, the regime promoted a national revolution, with the 1933 burning of degenerate books, Aryan art glorifying the perfect body, and propaganda cinema such as Leni Riefenstahl's Triumph of the Will, filmed at the 1934 Nuremberg rally, where hypnotized crowds saluted Hitler with Heil. The 1935 Nuremberg laws institutionalized anti-Semitism, stripping Jews of citizenship and banning mixed marriages, paving the way for Kristallnacht in 1938, a state-sponsored pogrom that destroyed synagogues and Jewish shops, signaling the coming Holocaust. But Hitler's conquest of all Germany did not stop at internal unification. He expanded his dominion through initially peaceful annexations that tested Western appeasement. In 1935 he reintroduced compulsory military service and remilitarized the Rhineland in 1936, betting, correctly, that France and Britain would not react. The Anschluss with Austria in March 1938, greeted with euphoria by many Austrians, incorporated his birthplace into the Reich, followed by the Sudeten crisis in Czechoslovakia, resolved by the Munich Agreement in September 1938, where Chamberlain ceded German-speaking territories, allowing full occupation of Czechoslovakia in 1939. Internally, the regime built an omnipresent police state. Himmler's Gestapo imprisoned dissidents in camps like Dachau, opened in 1933, Goebbels' propaganda controlled radio and newspapers, creating a cult of personality around Hitler portrayed as the infallible savior, and the war economy, directed by Göring in the 1936 four-year plan, prepared the nation for expansion with rationing and forced labor for inferiors. By 1939, Hitler had transformed Germany into a totalitarian fortress, with 80 million inhabitants united under Nazism, not through foreign conquest, but through a combination of terror, propaganda, and illusory prosperity that masked the impending abyss. This rise, from a failed artist to absolute dictator, was not inevitable but the result of democratic weaknesses, economic crises, and the malignant genius of a man who exploited human despair to forge an empire of death whose legacy echoes as an eternal warning against fascism.